This is Voluntary and Involuntary Minorities, Cultural-Ecological Theory of School Performance with some implications for education. Okay.
because he gave me the explanation for my thinking. If you work hard, you go to school and everything, it will pay off. But
Mhm.
the reality, what people are seeing, what their children are seeing, is different.
The the crazy part was what some African Americans were able to do was because they were in that segregated community. It's almost the equivalent of what many voluntary minorities do, where they're taking the resources, they come to America, they get the education, resources, and what do a lot of them do? Send it back home to make the conditions back home a little bit better. All right, well, let's pause there. It's all good. It's
Yeah.
all good.
So, but yeah, I was reading an article that my principal, I don't want to mention names since you're recording this, that my principal sent based on the article was something about Maryland State Board of Education. They released a new resource guide for educators.
Mm.
And they're calling it transforming the culture of Maryland schools for Black boys. Very specific.
I,
Did you come across that? Is that
I,
something that you were aware of?
yeah, I ripped that thing apart.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So when I read that, I was like, this is very similar to the stuff I've been reading in that book, The Miseducation. People just coming together and talk, talk, talk. Of course, we know there's an issue with Black boys, African Americans, or whatever, which kind of ties in with what Ogbu was, saying as well. Um, but I thought that was interesting, and I was going to bring that up, which is why I'm bringing it up now. Where they were talking about one thing that I read there that I think I kind of agree with is the push for same-sex classrooms. I don't know what you think of how you feel about that, but
I I think I think that perpetuates the same problem that ensued during the civil rights, where initially everything was about the, for the civil rights, they approached it from a unit standpoint: mother, father, child.
mhm,
What happened was they extracted the African American woman and pulled her into the feminist movement, separated her,
mhm,
as if that agenda was more befitting to her than it was to work with the civil rights. And what that did was that created a separation of that male female. They weren't working together, they were working separately and individually. So by the time they get to a point of hypothetically self actualization, they no longer have the ability to come together because they're so diametrically opposed as far as their viewpoints. They didn't cultivate together, they were cultivated separately. And now, I mean, it's anecdotal, but look at the relationship between the African American male and female. You know what I mean? So when you talk about the all boy classroom, it 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 to me it doesn't seem of benefit, especially when you talk about that whole social emotional piece, because you're creating an environment that doesn't exist anywhere else other than prison.
mm. But okay, so I grew up in a society and a culture where we didn't have much of co-ed education
Okay,
after elementary school. The push and the focus really was same-sex schools. I went to a same-sex high school.
got you.
It was all girls, and Humphrey went to co-ed, but a lot of my friends, the women were in a same-sex high school, the male were in a same-sex high school. So I'm from that background where, and I don't see. and I don't see how that has hurt us in the way that you're saying. But then we're talking about a different social context. So that because when you leave school, you're immersed in a society where everybody's working together, even where it might be like I come from a single family. My mom raised me, but at the same time you still had this sense of family community. So I guess that the social context is different. However, yeah, I went to an all girls school, and I think my brothers went to all boys school. Actually, my younger brother, the one he went to an all boys school, St. Gregory's, all boys. I went to all girls school. So, and there was this tradition of excellence, and healthy competition between the schools, between the different sexes, and so you would have kind of like a all boys school, but you kind of had like a sister school where you guys did certain things together, met on social, for social interaction.
Mhm.
So on that, I guess that is where I was coming from when I thought, well, that might not be a bad thing, because then you're helping them to build that sense of self, to really to really see themselves in that role of just owning their manhood and everything, and that leadership that you want in them and everything, um, and just not settling.
And
So
and I think what you said is key, the context, because in that situation, that single sex school environment was auxiliary to the community culture already established.
mm,
So the community culture was the foundation. This just, okay, well, now let me specifically work with you all to build, like you said, the character. The way they're talking about it, that single sex school becomes the foundation.
it's yeah, and I think that's the problem with the education in this country. It's like parents have just handed everything over to schools, and that is so, it's so scary, even and you see it even on popular culture, like this shows that you watch, especially with COVID, and you hear all these reality shows and the parents complaining they can't wait for the children to go back to school. I'm like, these are your children, for crying out loud. But it's like everything has been handed over to the schools, and teachers are not psychologists, teachers are not doctors, teachers are not therapists. They're teachers. Their job is to teach your child, and they can't do everything, but that is a problem. And but anyway, let's go back to Ogbu and see how we can tie all this in to
Okay.
what this man wrote. And we
Well,
may, yeah, go ahead.
well, I there were certain pieces in there that kind of lent themselves to specific recommendations.
Mm-hmm,
Um, so like on page 178, and people can reference it, paragraph 2, if it lends itself to allowing student interests to be embedded into the curriculum. So often student, when they say student centered, most people think, oh, we let the kid lead, the activity. So we tell them, we set it up where the kid is doing it on their own, and we consider that student centered. But really, it's an incorporation of their interests, their views, their perspectives. That's what's incorporated in order to generate the student center. So allowing some of their interests to be embedded into the curriculum, to teach certain, like we talk about all the time. Whether you write an essay on ants or anthropology, I can still tell whether you can write.
mm,
You see what I mean? So it's not necessarily the content all the time that can teach the skill. It's, the skill itself. So if the skill itself is the focus, what is the problem with allowing a student to pick their own topic? something that they feel, because I know personally I struggle writing when I don't know enough information to write. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I just don't know enough information about it. So you present these kids with a topic that you're just assuming they know something about, whether they read one piece of literature or not. That's not enough to go on, because when we write, we pull from all these different areas, prior knowledge and all that kind of stuff, and we create something. So if they have an interest and they want to write about that, they can write an expository, they can write a narrative, they can write, information. It doesn't matter. The skill is still writing the type of, writing that we're looking for. So allowing them to incorporate some of their interests was one of the things that I pulled out.
Yeah. Okay. So are you talking about where he was talking about oppositional identity?
Um, yes, oppositional identity. Yep,
Hmm.
yep.
I thought that was interesting, um, and I guess that has to do with the involuntary minorities and all that. Um, because I think that the paragraph before is where he was talking about the contradictory messages about education. Yeah, this is where you know, where parents are telling their children to work hard, but they themselves don't trust. You know, their attitudes and comments show that they don't trust schools, their, and everything. Okay, so you're thinking that this oppositional identity, that not having that trust for schools, that if the if the curriculum is more student centered the way you're talking about it, then it might really make it something that is more relevant to the students.
More relevant, and not necessarily the curriculum, but the instruction is more malleable, in the sense that, okay, your curriculum may say you need expository writing and you're going to use this piece from William Blake and this piece from, Wordsworth to analyze blah blah blah. Okay, if I give the student the option of drawing in their own interests, they may find two sets of music lyrics. They may find two TV shows that they want to analyze. They may find two other poems they want to analyze. Just giving them that flexibility and autonomy, you know, could help still foster the skill, but it's not prescribed to them. The only
Yeah,
thing prescribed is, what you're doing. How you do it is left up to you.
and the content is there. So and that makes sense because one of the things Obu was talking about is the idea that school and that the curriculum is just kind of a tool to, I guess, maybe even gentrify kids, or have them assimilate into a culture that is not theirs, the
Hmm.
the, the white culture, or to, like, it imposes on them. And when I think about some of the conversations I've had in the past with people, there's some truth to that, though, because the things that we tend to value, in this in education in the present school system just implies that.
And also, he talks about, remember, he also talks about the fact that the interpretation of the needed behaviors and the interpretation of what is a value, like you said, is determined by someone other than the group that's receiving it.
Okay.
So, this is, I mean, don't, and I want to preface this. I'm looking at possible solutions within the current context
Hmm.
of education.
Yeah.
A lot needs to be done, but if a band-aid can be offered, here are the band-aids. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, but looking at the big picture, it's, if you look at what he's saying, holds true, because prior to desegregation, you had all of the things that he referenced to the voluntary minorities present in the involuntary minority because you were forced to have it. You were forced to have your own culture. You were forced to have your own values. You were forced to the code switching because you had to be able to operate, in the dominant culture as well as function in your own society, local society. So those things were forced.
Mhm.
After desegregation, the belief was a full incorporation into the dominant society. You no longer have to do those things. So it was like now it becomes like he said, in order to succeed, you have to fully basically get rid of your own culture and fully assimilate,
Mhm.
which some people do,
Yeah.
no problem. But
Mhm.
then some resist that because they're like, so I can't be myself
Mhm.
because I have to be this way,
Mhm.
you know.
And then also, I think the one of the keys to this dichotomy or difference between voluntary and involuntary, like he said, with the voluntary, it's like they just by that term itself, they have come in here, the voluntary minority or their parents have come here because whatever it is here is they perceive it to still be better than what they had. And because they perceive it to be better, and in some cases, in many cases, at least when we think about just the physical, they're right. It's when they settle down and they begin to realize the psychological that they realize that, okay, maybe it wasn't, maybe it's not as bad as I think. But in terms of the physical, in terms of physical comforts, in terms of the ability just to get the basic, you know, and they're right. And so in that phase, during that phase where they're getting that to that place of okay, the physical comfort. So take for example somebody who comes to this country, comes from a place where maybe you had no shelter. It's essentially you were squatting with someone, your entire family, your whole life was squatting with someone, or a whole family, you're living in a one bedroom somewhere, and no, with no prospects and everything. And then you come here and you realize, okay, first off, if I work hard, I can rent an apartment that belongs to me, no matter whether that apartment is ridden with bugs or anything. At that time, you're not seeing all of that. And then maybe, okay, so if I go to school, if I get this degree in, maybe if I get a certification, be a nurse, be whatever, something that you can do relatively quickly if you apply yourself. I
Mhm.
can get a job, a decent job. I can put my children in school. I can buy a car. I've been working in my country for the past 10 years. I couldn't afford a car. I come here, in 1 year, I can buy a car. So there's no way you can tell a person like that it's bad over here because they're adults, they're 30 something, they've never owned a car in their life. The first time they own a car is when they get here, and they've only worked like a year, right?
Mhm.
So that maybe the average African American will consider minimum or whatever beneath me. To them it's still better than where they were coming from. So, and that is really the psyche that Ogbu was talking about, that as that voluntary minority. So when their children are going to school, when they're going to school, it's very different because they see the benefit of what they want to get from that at that point, and they're willing to do whatever it takes because they know that when they get to their community, they still have their identity. It's intact. So I'll do what I have to do in this larger society, but then I'm moving right back to my community. Now, for the involuntary, though, that doesn't exist anymore because, like you said, once segregation occurred and everything, maybe they had that during that era of segregation, and it was bad, and it's still, it's bad, but they've lost the good part of it, which is that sense of community and all that. So
And during segregation, you had a point of reference similar to the voluntary, where, okay, this is how it was. Let me remind you of this is how it was. This
Mhm,
is where we got into, but this is where we're trying to go.
mhm, mhm,
Just like the voluntary who's saying, okay, it's I have my point of reference. This is still better than what,
mhm.
but th- I know why I'm doing this.
I'm doing this exactly. So for that person, for those people, and for the children that have really taken to that narrative, then it becomes relatively easy for the educator to do their job with them, quote unquote, because the child has is coming in with their own purpose. So it really, it's not really as much what the educator is doing, but with the involuntary, however, they are coming with a different mindset. So now they've gotten to that stage of disillusionment. They see that this promise is like Martin Luther King said, the bank has gone bankrupt. They can't really cash on this. So, and I think that is, and that is where it becomes very, very important for educators to recognize that. That, I think, that is the pedagogical implication of this whole research. Because when you recognize that, then you're able to really address what it is that underlying psychological unconscious thing that is really driving the students, which even they themselves probably could not articulate to you at that age because they don't know. But you can see that and you're aware of that. And so you now have to start coming up with education that is really responsive to where they are.
And one of the premises of that responsive curriculum or responsive instruction baseline is rapport and high expectations. I know my student, and that's one thing I noticed, and I pulled from some other things when I was reflecting on this. But like even the report that you mentioned earlier, one of the recommendations is more minority, instructors. Well, that doesn't matter if the mentality is that of the
They,
majority.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's not the key, because I know I had white, black, I had plenty of white teachers who were able to teach me because they knew me,
Mm.
just
Mm.
knowing me. They
Yeah.
took the time to know me. So it's almost like a celebrity. Your favorite celebrity, you see them on TV, blah, 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 and you have this perception of them. And that's how teachers often walk into a classroom with their students. They already have preconceived perception, the implicit bias, all this kind of stuff. But then when you meet that celebrity, your perception of that person changes, whether it's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
The interaction with them and the rapport building with them helps you to determine how you view that person versus, oh, I'm just going to stick with what I thought, and that's how I'm going to approach it. I'm not going to try to get to know that person. I'm just going to, this is what I think about them, and I'm going to go forward. So that rapport building is lost, but I think it's lost because, like you said, the teacher is asked to be everything. So I don't have time to build rapport. Off the break, I'm given, a preliminary assessment, and then I got to analyze that data. And then I got to, so all these different responsibilities, but all of them can kind of be addressed with a foundation of rapport. I get to know who I'm dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I get to know who I'm dealing with. And once I know who I'm dealing with, I can set my expectations accordingly. I
Mm-hmm.
expect all my students to succeed, but what does that look like for Dr. Lawanson? What does that look like for Dr. Guilford? You know what I mean? Versus all my kids are going to succeed, and this is a standard, for everybody. Because for me, going from failing ninth grade to a C plus the in my repeat year, I would say that's progress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you come in and you've been getting A's this whole time, your expectations can't be the same as mine,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but getting to know who we're dealing with, and I think that goes back to what you were talking about as far as the pedagogical implications, building rapport to know who we're dealing with. I think a lot of times people just don't know. How many times have we had conversations with colleagues and we reveal something or they reveal something to us and like, oh, I didn't know that about the kid. And it's like it changes the whole, like, oh, so that explains why. Oh, okay. And now we have a different viewpoint, but it's third quarter. I mean, you know what I mean? So it's like,
It's almost out.
yeah, the if you will, the damage is done. So it's like I think that rapport and that high expectations is something that he speaks on, as far as that responsive, you know, um, instruction.
Mm. Wow. Okay. So, another implication for the, for at least one of the things that Ogbu recommended was to explicitly deal with that opposition, that oppositional thinking. Um, Remember, like I was saying, that sometimes even the students themselves, they might not be aware of what it is that is really influencing their behavior. Um, so so I guess what he's essentially saying is that teachers should help the minorities, especially the involuntary minorities, to really articulate what the driving force behind their own behavior.
Mm,
Because sometimes just talking, just speaking, having conversations about it aloud might help. I remember that I used to have that conversation with, remember some young men that were in my AP class a few years ago. It's been more than a few years
I was
ago.
about to say.
But these young men, that would tell me point blank, I'm not going to college, I'm not doing this. And but we would have some really good conversation about, why, and just understanding them. And I'm thinking that the conversation would probably have been richer if I had this type of literature
Mm,
to really understand really what it is that he's telling me, that even he himself does not, may not have really known, because really it boils down to what Obu is talking about here, that ambivalence, that idea of, okay, your parents are saying go to school, but they themselves, or you're looking at them and you're thinking, okay, so what's the point? And he's saying, I'm not going to go waste 4 years in college. I know that I'm very smart. I know I can do this, blah, 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 but this is what I want to do. And then as an educator as well, just knowing all of this then would help me, of course, while I'm pushing him to pass his AP literature exam and everything, and bring all the skills and that I knew he had, but maybe the conversation would have been different in terms of, okay, well, even if you're not going to college, this is how we can use what we're learning here to help with your business or whatever it is that you want to do, which was really, the young man kept telling me, I'm just going to start a business. I'm not.
important. I have a question for you.
Okay.
So in looking at Ogbu, and I'm looking at all these different entities, and
Uh,
I want to reiterate that there are so many layers to this that it's not going to be solved in our conversation.
yeah.
So, but one overarching thing, and maybe it's a little self-indulgent, and you can let me know.
Hmm.
It appears that this supports the concept of legitimate, not the legitimate professional learning communities, because the legitimate professional learning community utilizes the viewpoints of the local stakeholders. That means parents, that means students, that means business leaders. It utilizes their perspectives, which in the case of Ogbu would be the involuntary or voluntary minority community surrounding that school, to give input as to how to address certain things. You see what I mean? Versus the the top down, bureaucracy that we're used to. Now they say they, oh, we're 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 doing that, but not really, not really.
Mm.
But it appears to support the use and the implementation of the professional learning community from an educational standpoint. What do you think?
Mm. Well, I mean, you're right, because when I think about, like, I think professional learning communities, though, I think it has to be, for it to really work, it has to be voluntary, and that's what makes it authentic. And when it's voluntary and it's authentic, then people are more likely to to use it the way it should be used, and to to really, um, for it to make a difference, for it to make
Mm,
a difference. And like you said, with all that teachers have to do, it's almost as if it's so difficult to carve out the time that is needed, but it's very important as well. So because if the PLCs are working well, then educators are equipped with all that they need to be able to help the students. Unfortunately, educators seem to think they don't have the time for PLC, because there's so much that they have, so much going on, so much that they have to do, and so carving out that time becomes a chore. So, but the minute the the minute the leadership tries to carve out that time, then it becomes almost prescriptive, you know, that you have to do this. And that sometimes is the issue. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I, I think, and that's what I mean by like the misconception of them in its most genuine form. You don't have to carve out time because it's what you do. You know what I mean? This is how we operate. So right now, the way it's being implemented, PLC is something on top of something else.
Mm,
You see what I mean? It's on top of SEL. It's on top of, trauma based, instruction. It's on top of diversity and inclusion. It's on top of, it's on top of all these things, where in this genuine form, it's the foundation of it, and it makes it easier to do all those things because you're not trying to fit something else in.
mhm,
There, the PLC becomes the means of expressing that vision, which done properly, the vision justifies, okay, we're going to focus on SEL this year. We're not going to worry about, as a focus, we're not going to worry about trauma. We'll still offer those services, but that's not the focus. So once we establish the SEL, boom. So now we have PLC, SEL. Okay, now we add something else, but it builds upon each other instead of, you know this whole dumping on top of one another, where ultimately the teacher becomes, like you said at the very beginning, all these responsibilities. Like, I'm for what? And that's not research based, that's just anecdotal. Like, for what are we doing? Like, it's too much.
mm,
you know okay, okay, well, it's just one perspective. It's just
mm.
one perspective. but I just wanted to ask the question because you know things make sense in my brain sometimes, but I
Mhm.
always want to.
Yeah, I mean PLCs. I think PLCs are very important and they're essential. It's just like you said, if it's foundational, if it's in a way that it's the basis of everything that one does, then it then it will it becomes very instrumental for changes and so on and so forth. But when it's not that, that is the problem. Because first off, the way I see PLCs can be like what we're doing now can be that that's PLC, right here, having a learning community where you talk about things, that is what it is. And then that influences, that impacts your your practice. You take that into the classroom and you use it to, so that's it. But that's why I said it has to be voluntary, or there has to be a space where people can actually come together and they're not feeling rushed, or oh, I just, this is something that I have to do. They have to own it. Even if you create that space, they have to own it, to make it authentic, and then start to put that into place. But I'm yet to, like in our building, we do have, I guess we have a lot of PLCs. The collaborative planning ideally should be PLC, professional learning community, really, where you come together. But people come together, and I mean, you've been in that building. People come together, and everybody's wanting to find out, when are we leaving here? Why are we here? So, and that is, so for me, that is why I'm saying the reality is say tells me, and I know that our building is not the same build, it's not different in that, or it's not like exception to the rule, you know
Hmm.
so, and when we think about it, and even what we had was hailed as the best in the building, but still, so that's what I mean by, real authentic PLCs. That
Okay.
do we even have those? And that is why I said it has to be something that people are just motivated to want to do.
I I have this inkling that almost like the classroom. You know how you have those certain instructors where they fear giving students control or options because they don't think that the kids are going to
Mhm.
adhere to it, or you give the kids the option but they're so conditioned to being prescribed that they have no idea what they're going to do.
Mhm.
I think I have a thought that school systems believe the same thing and sometimes it proves true. School systems believe the same thing about teachers. They've been prescribed for so long that if you just give them the options, sometimes it's like some of them don't know what to do.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And that's not a knock. It's just how you've been. It's like everything is prescribed for you for so long, and then everybody PLC says, like you said, volunteer. Pick an article. Well, what article? Like, you know what I mean? So it's a training that has to take place where you teach them how to work in a PLC before you implement. You can't just say, "Oh, we're now a PLC."
Mm.
You know,
So I guess the idea is you model you
eh,
model it first.
well, we'll save that for a different conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll say that.
But that was also one of the implications that Ogbu talked about, the importance of role model. And I think that that is another very important component. When I think of role models, I'm thinking of mentors,
Hmm.
having mentors, and I think that is very important. In our, especially when we're thinking about the involuntary minorities, I think it's important that they that role model, that mentoring piece, I think is going to be it's very important in helping them to get to whatever success would look like for them, helping them to get to that place. Um, and I think that is one of the good parts of these like this program that our colleague runs,
Mm-hmm.
fact that they have mentors that they assigned, at least the cohort that just finished, they've talked about, how those mentors have really, for some of them, those mentors have really made a huge impact, and helped them to stay the course and everything. So I think another implication for this, for educators, is the importance of, like you said, reaching out to that larger community, looking for those role models in those involuntary communities who have, quote unquote, reached a level of success. And it doesn't have to be that they've just taken on a different culture, but maybe in their own culture, in their context, they've been able to make it work for them. And it's very important that that the students identify with that, and not just people that they see on, celebrities that they see on TV, social media, that they have no clue what's going on in their personal lives. I think that is a very important part of this whole education. um, it takes a lot of planning,
It
it takes a
does.
lot of work, um, and it takes a lot of looking at, almost individualizing. The problem with education the way it is right now is like, it's almost like a factory, like, everything has been so, everything is so cookie cutter. It's like the bureaucracy has grown so large that, um, I think it just needs to be I shouldn't say that, but it needs to be dismantled. The way it is now, there needs to be a change.
Well, hold that for our discussion of the text.
Okay, okay.
But I do agree with you with the mentoring. I think I definitely think the mentoring is key, and I think a key of the mentoring is variety.
Mhm. Yes.
You know, a person such as myself, I could be a mentor
Mhm.
for a student that may be reluctant but still sees the value in higher education. I could be that mentor because I can relate to that.
Mhm.
But at the same time, now I'll be honest, I'm a little different in the sense of I'll switch it up in a second where that kid who has they're dead set on not going to higher education,
Mhm.
supporting them in whatever it is they want to pursue, I don't have a problem with that
Yeah.
because it doesn't shift, you know, my values or impact my values. But for some people it does.
Mhm.
So, that's why I said the variety is key because we want to make sure that the mentor is not in turn just prescribing propaganda to that student saying, no, you don't want to do that, you want to do this. No, the kid is bringing to you what it is they see for themselves.
Actually, somebody, like you said, somebody who gets to know them, who listens to
There
them,
you go. There you go.
somebody who really gets to know them and listen to them. And that is very important. That is very important. And I agree. And being able to show them the variety of choices that they have, or what is out there for them, you know, because even those kids who do the involuntary, even when they talk about, this is not relevant, I don't want to do this, it's still because that is what they're exposed to, whether they realize it or not. It is what is it's because of the limitation of what they're exposed to. That is why they're thinking that way. So I guess um, recognizing what they're saying, being responsive to that, but also exposing them to different things, exposing them to different things that people have done, and so on and so forth. That and sometimes that will take you, the educator, out of your comfort zone, and that's okay. But sometimes it would take you out of your comfort zone. Sometimes it would make you, you know, expose them to things that you might be like, I don't know about this. But at least it's giving them the variety, and then they're able to make that choice, and you're able to have a conversation about, okay, this is what I've chosen to do, and this is why I'm doing it. So yeah. But I think this is a really good, it's a good read for anybody who has to teach minority students. I think it's a really good read, even if you're a minority yourself, because some of the things that he wrote about are things that, unconsciously I knew, but I never articulated the way he did.
Mm,
Sometimes just reading something that somebody has put down on paper, it just makes it like, it just takes on a different, um, I guess, meaning. And
mm.
then you start to become more conscious of your response to that, and how you deal with that, or how you process that, and so yeah.
Well, I enjoyed the dialogue, banter, however you want to call it.
Whatever you
Um,
call it.
and yeah, I enjoyed this. And like you said, it's informal. It's just a conversation. Um, you know, and that's what, and I think that's what made it easier for me to, just I'm not worried about, oh, did I say no? We're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
Um, so all right, well, I'm gonna close this and thank you so much.